we'll be going over some of the different TVA cues that you will find in various programs, including mine. So, my name is Katrina Oakley and I am a pregnancy and postpartum exercise specialist, and I work with mums who have diastasis recti and pelvic floor issues. And one of the key things that we need to learn after the connection breath is how to engage our TVAs. So we need to remind our TVAs that they're meant to be working, and there are various cues to do this, and that can make it really confusing. But here's the key. No one cue is right for everybody. That's why there are so many of them. For some people, you need to use one cue. For other people, that is totally wrong for them and causes them to grip and bear down. So you need to go through numerous different cues to find out which is the one that will work for you. Here's the other deal. What works for you standing up may not be right for you lying down. It may not be right for you in a hands and knees position. So you need to know all of them in order to work out what's the best one for you. As you progress through exercises, you will also might need a different cue because you're starting to work in more of a coordinated manner. All right, so let's go through a few of them, and you will use these with any pelvic floor work like you do in the Pelvic Floor Freedom Program, or any ab-specific work like you would do in my 8-week progression and moving forward with ab work. All right, so the first one, and probably the most confusing, is the kegel. All right, why do we do a kegel? Well, our kegel, our exhale when we engage our TVAs, the pelvic floor is the start point of that. So we worked on that in our last video about the TVA engagement versus the connection breath. So when we inhale, everything relaxes and expands, and our pelvic floor expands. Then when we exhale, it always starts from the pelvic floor up. So we think about the slight kegel. So we exhale and think about front of our pelvic floor, back of our pelvic floor coming together and sucking up like a straw. And that will activate just this lower part here. If you suck up a little harder, the lower TVAs will start to engage, and that's what you'll feel in this area. So one of the ways to feel that is find the hip bones, go diagonally in and down just here, and if you do a kegel, a strong kegel with an exhale, it's always important to do it with the breath. So inhale, relax, exhale, think about that kegel, pull up that little bit more. And if you've got a strong enough kegel without over-dominating everything else, you'll feel just under here pop out against your fingertips and firm up. It's a little easier when you're lying down versus standing, but when you're standing, you should feel it firm up. For general purposes, most people should not do any harder work than that. If you keep working and working and working, your external core will start firing as well, and that goes against everything we're trying to do. All right, so it's a very gentle, think about kegel and an extra pull up. Now, this is the cue you would use if you have a loose and weak pelvic floor that you need to strengthen as well, and it's not firing automatically when you exhale. If you have a tight and overactive pelvic floor, you should not cue it because it's already lifting and we don't want to over cue it. So in that case, a great cue is pull up from the pubic bone, and I like to think of it as a pull up or a very gentle scoop. Now note, when I say scoop, I don't actually scoop. My glutes have nothing to do with this, and my pelvis shouldn't move, right? We're not scooping like that. We are just pulling up and thinking about scooping slightly. And what you will see is my lower core, inhale, relax, exhale, gentle scoop, is just firming up here. Did you notice that I didn't move, I didn't suck in, I didn't grip, I didn't move my upper body? It's just this very gentle scoop, okay? And that's it. In fact, that's all you should need for the whole beginners program. You shouldn't be like firing everything else because we're working the deep, deep core, not everything else, until at least in stage 3 when we start doing a few extra exercises to get some of those external muscles working as well. The next cue, which if you are super weak, you might need a little bit more effort in order to get everything to kind of go in and flatten. And we can use this if we don't grip under our rib cage, because as soon as you grip under the rib cage, you put more pressure down and out. So what that means is if I grip under my rib cage, I put more pressure down and out, and I end up with a lower belly, mid belly pooch and pelvic floor issues. So we don't want that, so we don't grip under our rib cage. We keep here nice and squishy, and we think about zipping up. So again, we start with the pelvic floor, and we inhale, exhale, zip up slowly, stopping when this area just starts to fire. Okay, so watch that again. So we inhale, relax, exhale, zip up slowly. Okay, all right, so that's zipping up. Some people will use the cue close the book. So when that is that's like thinking about drawing your hip bones together, closing a book. It's not a cue I like, but it works for some people. It's better on the ground than standing. So if you're having trouble kind of getting those TVAs to pop, sometimes this can work. The reason I don't like it that much as a general cue is because people have a tendency to really try and actually close the book and really try to work into it, and they tend to go like this, and they tend to tuck and bring everything in and overuse their obliques, and that goes against everything we're really trying to do. But it can work for some people, because some people, that visualization of everything coming together and closing really works to get their lower abs. So if you can't work the zip up or just the gentle pull up from the pubic bone, try it, because it might work well for you. The next one is hissing like a snake, or some people talk about blowing out 100 candles. Now these are both great cues. The blowing out the candle is a great one to kind of get everything coordinated and slower and more controlled. The one issue with blowing out is if you keep going, sometimes you overactivate and you overengage. So what happens with the blowing out the candle is, because you've pursed your lips like this, so like, you're actually making more resistance with the exhale, so it's actually harder to exhale, which means you work a little harder and your exhale is slower, which allows everything to coordinate, which is awesome. So we inhale, exhale, and if your core is already coordinated, it can work really well. So that means you have to have had that pelvic floor firing and think about that zip up. And if that's working naturally, the blowing out of the candles will also make it work naturally in a slower, more controlled way, which is fantastic. Here's a couple of notes with both the zip up, in fact, all of them. If your inhale is incorrect, if your inhale is up here, and then you exhale, you will never engage your core correctly. Watch it from the side. If your inhale is up here, and you feel your back move, your chest moves, and then you exhale, look what happens. Everything goes down. Remember what we said at the start. It has to start from the pelvic floor up. So if your inhale is up here, you will never get a good engagement. So if you cannot connect with the pelvic floor and do a really good inhale without it coming up here and your diaphragm not dropping, you need to go back to the connection breath. Because there's no point you practicing TVA engagements, because you won't be able to do them, because you'll be working against yourself. You're going to be pushing pressure down as you're trying to push pressure up, and guess what happens? It all goes out at the middle and you end up with a big belly. So if you can't get your inhale into your sides and back, that's what you need to work on. And we work on that a lot in the pelvic floor program with a lot of mobility work, or in the 8-week program with a lot of breathing exercises to work into the back. All right, I prefer than blowing out the candles, the hissing like a snake. The reason for that, so that's more of a like that. The reason for it is the sound actually activates your abs. I know there was a question about shouting at your kids. Like, does that work your core? Yes, it does. It can also destroy your core depending on how reactive your core is. But when we sing, when we shout, when we laugh, when we make that sound, especially a deep sound, it actually activates all our ab muscles. So that's great. With the hissing, you're going to get that extra effort with it. So you're going to get a much more of a and it will really activate into those lower abs and into this deep core. All right, next one I want to mention is belly button to spine, because if you are doing any other program, especially if you're doing something that is not actually for postpartum, if it's not directed for diastasis, if you're just doing a Beachbody program or something you found off YouTube or any of those types of workouts and thinking you'll modify it, you will hear this cue a lot. It's belly button to spine. And I very rarely use it. I do for people whose mid-TVAs don't work and they don't grip, which is a very unusual coordination of it. In fact, I think out of the thousands of ladies I've worked with, there's been about 4 who can do belly button to spine without gripping. But I want to tell you about it because if you will hear it in other programs, you may do it incorrectly, and I want you to know how to do it correctly. When somebody tells you belly button to spine, more often than not, people think belly button to spine, and they do it on the inhale, which is 100% wrong because it stops you from breathing properly. It cinches you and pushes your diaphragm up and your pelvic floor down. Belly button to spine is always done on the exhale. Now watch what the difference is. Inhale, exhale. Can you see how my belly actually doesn't go in that far if I do belly button to spine on the exhale? Because you physically can't, okay? So if you hear belly button to spine and you're like, I want to do that because that's the cue for me, and it is for some people, and it really gets the mid-TVAs, you do exhale, so inhale, relax, exhale, belly button to spine, okay? On the exhale, never on the inhale. So on the exhale, now, you have to really control it, because once you've got like probably 30 to 40% of your exhale and you've pulled it in, if you keep pulling it in, you will grip under your rib cage and put pressure down and work against yourself. So if you happen to use belly button to spine, you will probably only be able to do a 20 to 30% effort with the exhale. So you need to know that, otherwise you will over-engage, bear down, and cause more issues, okay? So belly button to spine will work if you do it on the exhale and much less effort, and it's a cue that you can use if your mid-TVAs aren't firing, your lower TVAs and your pelvic floor are functional, and your upper TVAs don't grip, okay? So it's a good cue if all those things fall into place. The last cue I want to tell you about is what I call the V-cue, and this is the cue I use for people who have mid-TVA problems. We are always so focused down our center line and closing everything, but the point is that our TVAs wrap around this way, so they actually, when we engage our TVAs, our gap will actually widen because we're pulling tension. So let me just grab a band to show you. If you think about our connective tissue, so our connective tissue in the middle here is connected to our TVAs, and our TVAs wrap this way around us, okay? So when we pull our TVAs tight, it pulls the connective tissue tight, which is what we want. But it also, just like with a band, to pull it tight, will widen things. So most people focus on bringing everything together, which is actually why they don't get their deep core to fire first. We actually nearly want to widen our gap before we think about bringing everything together with our external core. So the V-cue is where you can also find connective tissue in our gap and our TVA. So we often work here and engage and feel like it firming up in this area. But if you go to the opposite side of your rectus abdominis, in this area, you will also feel them there. So I like people who have mid-TVA issues to come in and find the other side of their rectus abdominis around about at their belly button area. And I like them to think about pulling up and out, right? So it's actually pull up, so get that little bit of that pelvic floor or that pubic bone lift, and then out to your fingertips over here. And this one's very successful with my private clients that I do one-on-ones with, which I do lots of virtual one-on-ones. You can find those on my website. And they find this cue will actually flatten their mid-belly if they have a mid-belly pooch. So that is the last one. So let me just rephrase some of these cues for you. We have the gentle kegel, because sometimes that's all you need to activate everything. We have the zip up, and how much you zip up and whether you cue your pelvic floor depends on what your pelvic floor is doing and what your other muscles and the coordination is like. We have the close the book. It's not one of my favorites, but it might work for you. We have blowing out the candles or hissing like a snake. I prefer hissing like a snake because it also activates with your voice. Then we have the belly button to spine, which will work as long as you use the exhale, less effort, don't grip and have a mid-TVA problem, or we have that V-cue. Now I know that there's probably many others, but you have to find which is right for you and which is right for you in the different positions, because that may change and it may change throughout your journey with diastasis and pelvic floor issues.
Make sure you hit that like button and comment below if you did, and I hope to see you again here very soon.